The cover of this article is crazy. It's Jeffrey Epstein, International Man of Mystery. And on that cover, this is 2002, and on that cover is a caricature of Bill Clinton. In the background is Kevin Spacey and Chris Tucker boarding the Lolita Express, the private plane of Jeffrey Epstein. Super crazy, super gross, and it's really kind of hard to get away from what this exposes about our elite. Hey there, friends, fans, and foes of Dad Saves America. John Popola here, and I thought I would take this Friday to try to navigate two of the biggest and craziest and frankly longest standing stories captivating our national conversations, namely the Epstein files and the fresh revelations regarding the Russiagate, Russian collusion story that engulfed President Trump's first term. And there's no better place to start than right there.
They conspired to subvert the will of the American people who elected Donald Trump in that election in November of 2016. They worked with their partners in the media to promote this lie, ultimately to undermine the legitimacy of President Trump and launching what would be a years-long coup against him and his administration. We're here today because the American people deserve the truth, they deserve accountability, and they deserve justice.
Back now to our top story. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard releasing new documents claiming to support the theory that Obama-era officials, including the former president, conspired behind a Russia hoax narrative with the intention of damaging the incoming president, Donald Trump.
So what's going on here? Because here we are in 2025, and here we are 8 months into the president's second term, and we've got this story dropping of new revelations from Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence. Now, one could say this might be an effort to try to move the conversation off of the failure to release all the Epstein files, and I'm going to get to that piece of the story. But I think it's worth remembering that Tulsi Gabbard has her own reasons for digging into what was going on around the 2016 and then subsequent elections as it pertains to stories about Russian interference.
Now to an extraordinary development in the presidential campaign. Hillary Clinton, the 2016 nominee, called Tulsi Gabbard, one of the current candidates, quote, the favorite of the Russians. Nancy Cordes is following this. And Nancy, what are we to make about all this?
Well, Nora, Hillary Clinton did not mention Tulsi Gabbard by name, but an aide confirms that that's who she was talking about when she made this stunning claim that the Russians had already hit on a way to meddle in the 2020 election, much in the same way they meddled in her election in 2016. On a podcast interview, Clinton said, quote, they're grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She's the favorite of the Russians. They have a bunch of sites and bots and other ways of supporting her so far.
A bunch of sites and bots and other ways, just like the 2016 election. Coming back to the story, Matt Taibbi has covered this extensively in a series of pieces over at his site Racket News. His conclusions after reviewing all this material are really direct, that there's no doubt that Russiagate was a cover-up specifically by Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration.
This thing happened where suddenly we were told that the Russians had interfered in the election and pulled off what sounded like the biggest intelligence coup in history, that they had a Manchurian candidate as president-elect. And I remember thinking as a journalist, either that's true or this is the biggest fraud of all time. There's really no other option. And we went through an extraordinary ordeal with 3 years of mania that ended with the Mueller business, with no indictments. But it was never fully debunked. The people who brought the case against Trump never admitted that it was fake, that it was a mistake. And there was never a reckoning like there was with the WMD issue, where at least the press admitted that there were some screw-ups. And what happened this week is that we finally got a peek at the actual evidence that they used to create this intelligence community assessment that you and Aaron Mate and myself and many others have been trying to figure out what exactly substantiated the claim that Vladimir Putin, quote unquote, aspired to help Donald Trump because he had a quote unquote clear preference for him. And now we know. And it turns out nothing is substantiating it.
We'll put a link to this entire interview with Matt because it's really quite good. And but I want to call out a couple things from one of the articles that dives into this, into the declassified documents, because the conclusions are really kind of shocking. And I realize that this feels like such an old story, but the fact that, as he noted, a lie travels halfway around the world, as they say, before the truth can get out. What is that saying? There's a saying about this that is really, I got to Google this now. I've got to Google it because there's a saying, and it's a great saying. A lie can travel. What is it? What the hell am I doing here? I got my non-Google search because Google's creepy. Let me find another way in here. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. And I think that this is something that is important for us to take stock of, because these kind of lies are happening all the time to, frankly, to all of us now that we're all, to some degree, in the public domain. So what's the nature of this lie? What actually appears to have happened? Well, according to Matt's reporting and review of the documents, it's pretty gross. This is purely a Clinton corruption story, probably the last in a long line, as neither Bill nor Hillary will have careers when it's finished if they stay out of jail. Characteristically, the most powerful political family since the Kennedys won't just bring many individuals down with them, but whole institutions, as the FBI, the CIA, the presidency of Barack Obama, and a dozen or so of the most celebrated brands in commercial media will see their names blackened forever through the association with this idiotic caper. A fair number of those media companies should and likely will go out of business. So Matt doesn't pull any punches, part of the reason I like him. But when you think about what's going on here, I don't think mincing words is what's called for. 1, Hillary Clinton and her team apparently hoped to deflect from her email scandal. Just as a reminder, this is the scandal in which Hillary stored essentially all of her emails as Secretary of State, which is the role of international diplomat, on a private server, which was technically a crime, and also opened the U.S. to perhaps the biggest cybersecurity threat the country's ever experienced. But anyway, so that was an oopsie. That was a little boo-boo. And Hillary wanted to deflect the news and the campaign of 2016 from focusing on that. So her campaign decided to try to tie Trump to Putin. Number 2, American security services learned of these plans. And this is where things go off the rails. Well, more off the rails. And 3, and this is the most important part, instead of outing them, authorities used state resources to massively expand and amplify her scheme. The last stage required the enthusiastic cooperation and canine incuriosity of the entire commercial news business, which cheered as conspirators made an enforcement target of Trump actually an irrelevant bystander. He wraps up this portion of it, because the article goes into more detail, by saying Hillary Clinton got in a jam. The FBI, CIA, and Obama White House got her out of it by setting Trump up. That's it. It was a cover-up, plain and simple. And what we're seeing here is a conspiracy. If this is all true, which it appears to be, this is the most powerful people on earth, who all are existing inside of the executive branch, conspiring to undermine the incoming president, conspiring to try to thwart the president from being elected at the time, and then tie up his presidency and therefore the results of the democratic process. This is in part what we used to call in the computer world FUD, spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And that is what they were doing. Now, when you think back, it's pretty obvious why Hillary needed to pull out all the stops, including perhaps treasonous criminal conspiracy, because she was such a uniquely bad candidate, she couldn't answer even simple questions, which she gets honestly from her husband, who had to define what the word is actually means.
You know, in 76, Jimmy Carter famously said, "I will not lie to you."
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to tell you, I have tried in every way I know how, literally from my years as a young lawyer all the way through my time as Secretary of State, to level with the American people.
You talk about leveling with the American people. Have you always told the truth?
I've always tried to. Always. Always.
I've always tried not to lie. And, you know, trying is half the battle. Yeah, well, it turned out maybe the trying wasn't as hard as it needed to be. I'm just scratching the surface because there's a bigger story at play. Among the co-conspirators, probably chief among them, was the former head of the CIA, the director of the CIA, John Brennan. And he has been out there since 2016 spreading this story as far and wide as he possibly could. And the articles go into detail of how he undermined the actual internal processes of the CIA to push this Russian connection and the Steele dossier and all that stuff.
John Brennan told the House Intelligence Committee yesterday he grew increasingly worried last year about contact between members of the Trump campaign and Russian officials. Talking about his general experience in counterintelligence, Brennan went on to say frequently individuals who go along a treasonous path do not even realize they're along that path until it gets to be a bit too late.
One might wonder if he was actually talking about himself in that testimony. But this process here, this way that this secret conspiracy managed to find its way out into the broader public discourse was fairly direct. So again, just to kind of recap the players involved, there was a meeting between first-term President Trump and Vladimir Putin in Helsinki that was fawned over as a perfect example of what a pawn President Trump was to Vladimir Putin. And of course, we saw this firsthand in our media from the likes of soon-to-be canceled Stephen Colbert.
Americans of every political stripe have been horrified by Trump's Helsinki hell-sucking, where Putin was playing chess while Trump was eating his own checkers. Choking hazard. It's a choking hazard. They should have given it to him.
So that's a bad joke. But what's not really funny is when the former director of the CIA repeats lines like this, that Donald Trump's press conference performance in Helsinki rises to and exceeds the threshold of high crimes and misdemeanors. It was nothing short of treasonous. Nothing short of treasonous. This is the second time that the former director of the CIA was referring to President Trump as treasonous. Not only were Trump's comments imbecilic, he is wholly in the pocket of Putin. Republican patriots, where are you? President Trump is a deeply flawed person. I'm going to get to that. He is. He's not what I would call the model of the perfect statesman. And, you know, even those of us, myself included, that voted for President Trump can't say like, oh, I want my son to grow up and be like Donald Trump. But it's hard not to understand where he and Tulsi and many of the folks in the administration are coming from when they appear to want to put all of these people in prison. Because the question we have to ask ourselves is, how are we ever going to have any kind of accountability for the kind of conspiracies that are actually taking place? That's part one of the question of secrets. This whole Russia story was a secret conspiracy concocted inside the executive branch among the intelligence agencies that all ladder up to the Department of Justice, which itself is kind of weird, and the President of the United States, at that time, Barack Obama. When you have that kind of secret conspiring and secrets keeping, which is what the CIA entirely is, you are going to get massive abuses of power. And there doesn't appear to be a mechanism that we are comfortable with to deal with that. Or maybe we're going to find out if there's a mechanism to hold people accountable. It's important to remember that these same agencies who like to operate in secret and operate in clandestine ways don't want us as individuals to have any secrets at all. They don't want us to be able to compose our own thoughts by ourselves or to do research on the internet without being spied upon. And it's important to note that the same players involved in Russiagate, and frankly, in this case, going all the way back to the weapons of mass destruction secret conspiracies of the Iraq War, have also been lying to us about how much they try to violate our own secrecy. So this is a really important moment. This was a congressional hearing where James Clapper, who at the time was the director of national intelligence, the role that Tulsi Gabbard now occupies, was asked point blank, is his agency spying and collecting information on millions of Americans?
So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
So that's a lie. That's a lie. That was false. That was perjury. That's technically a crime. As I understand it, it's technically like a misdemeanor, so he wouldn't go to jail simply for lying to Congress under oath. Here, there's certainly other reasons he should probably go to jail, but these are the same people secretly conspiring to transform our politics and undermine our elections. They're actively trying to crack open our encryption, break into our phones, spy on us in every which way, collude with international spy agencies to do so. And frankly, if the election had gone the other way, we would be under even more surveillance than we are right now, because the last administration was all in on this stuff. It was the same crew. Secrets for me, if I'm the CIA or if I'm the Obama administration, but not for thee. And if I'm the Trump administration, because it turns out that President Trump, who came to town promoting transparency, hasn't been as transparent as he's said he would when it comes to the Epstein files. So let's talk about the Epstein files. Now, again, I'm not an expert on the Epstein files, but I think they are a crazy story that's been with us longer than most people realize. And they point to this pivot point when it comes to privacy and secrecy. Because I believe fundamentally that we as individuals need privacy. We need it. We need secrecy. Before starting to roll this video, me and my producers were sitting around talking, pushing on these ideas. What's right? What's wrong? What's appropriate? What's not? We need to be able to do that to formulate our thinking. It shouldn't all be broadcast. And we live in a time where everything we do is broadcast. I'm doing it right now. And it raises an interesting question. What do other people have a right to know about our lives as individuals and as groups of people that come together voluntarily? Freedom of association. Where does the public's right to know start to take effect? And where do we as individuals and private groups have the right, or should I say, whether you like the notion of rights or not, should and must and need to protect our privacy and our right to operate in secret? And the Epstein files sits at the transition point, I think, between private secrecy, privacy for the individual, privacy for the private citizen, and what I would say is the need for maximum transparency for those who wish to use force against us. The politicians, the members of the state apparatus who can use the force of the gun of the state to do things to us against our will. And let's start with a quote that is very uncomfortable for President Trump because of course it is, because how could it not be? And this is from a New York Magazine article in 2002. So this is over 20 years ago. Epstein likes to tell people that he's a loner, a man who's never touched alcohol or drugs, and one whose nightlife is far from energetic. And yet, if you talk to Donald Trump, a different Epstein emerges. Quote, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy," Trump booms from a speakerphone. "He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do." And remember, Trump owned the Miss Universe pageant, among other things, and among his many wives. So he was known to be a playboy. It is said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it, Jeffrey enjoys his social life. Now, a lot has been made of this quote, for good reason, because it's kind of gross. It's not an implication necessarily of crime, but it's gross. And it gets to something that's a little hard to understand. Why, if you're Donald Trump in 2002 and you love Jeffrey Epstein, you think he's a great guy, why would you tell New York Magazine that he likes girls on the younger side? That's really strange. It's kind of hard to figure out. Why would you admit that? What game is being played in the pages of a public magazine between, billionaire magnate playboy Donald Trump at the time and fairly secretive Jeffrey Epstein? What's going on here? This seems like something you wouldn't do if you like Jeffrey Epstein. It's a weird thing to say. I don't know if it's a Freudian slip. I don't know if it's a little jab, but it's strange. But the thing that's even more strange is how few people have really dug back through this article. Because again, this was from 2002. And the cover of this article is crazy. It's Jeffrey Epstein, International Man of Mystery. And on that cover, this is 2002, is a caricature of Bill Clinton. In the background is Kevin Spacey and Chris Tucker boarding the Lolita Express, the private plane of Jeffrey Epstein. And as I understand it, President Clinton has been engaged in shenanigans with Jeffrey Epstein for a really long time. Super crazy, super gross, and it's really kind of hard to get away from what this exposes about our elite. You could say, well, this is all private, secret matters, and this is what President Trump is trying to say now. He's saying, look, this is all big nothing burger. This is a hoax.
Look, the whole thing is a hoax. It's put out by the Democrats because we've had the most successful 6 months in the history of our country. And that's just a way of trying to divert attention to something that's total bullshit.
It's total bullshit. I will say it is a little shocking to hear the President of the United States in the Oval Office call things total bullshit to the press.
And that's just a way of trying to divert attention to something that's total bullshit.
There's a picture of the Gipper, Ronald Reagan, right over his left shoulder. I don't think Ronald Reagan would be especially happy to hear that handling of the Oval Office. I'm sorry, Mr. President. This is kind of off the rails. This is off the rails. And this story is crazy. The story is crazy not because Donald Trump has been engaged in criminal sexual acts. It's crazy because it's been well established and known for years that Trump, as a New York playboy and a former Democrat, has been in deep with all this forever. This is not new. Here's President Trump and then, I think, wife Melania with Bill and Hillary Clinton laughing it up. This is not new. You go a little further back, and here's President Trump with then girlfriend Melania and a model who's randomly there. And again, Bill Clinton, this time Hillary's absent. I think we can all see why Hillary's absent from this picture. This is what Peter Turchin calls inter-elite competition. That's partly what's going on. This is that you have these different factions of the elite at war with each other, and we all pay the price for the destruction, that the waste that is laid to our society. So President Trump's argument against releasing all available information regarding the Epstein files is that it would expose innocent people to, let's say, harassment and intimidation and guilt by association. And I think it's actually important to go back to that article, that 2002 article, because it helps you understand how that might have a grain of truth in it. So if you'll bear with me, I want to read a little bit of this thing because, again, 2002, over 20 years ago, this was an expose. It starts. Bill Clinton has a new pal. He comes with cash to burn, a fleet of airplanes, and a keen eye for the ladies. This is the opening sentence. A keen eye for the ladies. To say nothing of a relentless brain that challenges Nobel Prize-winning scientists across the country and for financial markets around the world. Ever since the Post, page 6, ran an item about the president's late September visit to Africa with Kevin Spacey and Chris Tucker on his new benefactor's customized Boeing 727, the question of the day has been, who in the world is Jeffrey Epstein? It's a life full of question marks. Epstein is said to run $15 billion for wealthy clients, yet aside from limited founder Leslie Wexner, his client list is a closely held secret. A former Dalton math teacher, he maintains a peripatetic. I see, I'm not smart enough to read these articles, I think, sometimes. He maintains a peripatetic salon of brilliant scientists, yet possesses no bachelor's degree. For more than 10 years, he's been linked to Manhattan, London social figure Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of the mysteriously deceased media titan Robert Maxwell, yet he lives the life of a bachelor, logging 600 hours a year in his various planes as he scours the world for investment opportunities. He owns what is said to be Manhattan's largest private house, yet runs his business from a 100-acre private island in St. Thomas. And it goes on to explain how Jeffrey Epstein has hosted, as it said, Nobel Prize winners, scientists, and conducted salons and symposiums of smart, wealthy, interesting people, including former President Bill Clinton. What's going on here? What is that exactly? I know a little bit about this in the sense that over the years, as I've worked in public policy related things, not as a lobbyist or as a politician, but frankly, making videos about ideas like this, I've gone to various conferences. I've gone to meetings. I've gone to meetings with small groups of people that are trying to figure out how do we advance liberty in America? How do we get America's constitutional principles to be resurgent in a world where, frankly, progressive ideas I mostly don't like have been dominant? You could say I have been among the elite that have participated in secret scheming. And I have been to events with hoity-toity people. Probably one of the biggest ones at one point involved many of the titans of Silicon Valley, including Tim Cook and Elon Musk and Larry Page. I once walked around for over 2 hours grilling Paul Wolfowitz on why he thought the war in Iraq could possibly go well. And he actually was weirdly quite receptive to just laying it out and explaining why he thought it would be something like the US's role in Romania and after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The point is, I've gotten a window into how what I consider to be a very essential thing, our private right to associate and to conduct ourselves and to come up with our thoughts, and frankly, to some extent, to scheme, how that can, over time, end you up in the room where it happens, or in this case, perhaps, the private jet where it happens. And I think that that's what makes this Jeffrey Epstein story so crazy and so interesting and so important, because it exists at the intersection of the people in power, the decision makers, for whom maximum public transparency is not only warranted, it is essential, and private freedom of association that should be protected, that isn't everyone's right to know. I think it's convenient for President Trump to now go from being like, I'm going to release it all, to being like, well, maybe I'm not going to release it all. But it is the rope he's hanging himself with. This video is like a stone skipping across the surface of a very, very deep lake filled with skeletons and dead bodies. And I can't hope to do justice to these two complex scandals and conspiracies. But what I will say is this. We face a really interesting problem in our modern age of having a TV studio in our pocket and broadcasting ourselves 24/7. And that is that we have now blurred the lines between the right to private privacy and secrecy, the right to keep my business to myself, and the public's right to know. I think the issue's much clearer with Jeffrey Epstein, and in part because he's a proven criminal, a proven violent, disgusting criminal. But when it comes to us as individuals, it's gotten pretty murky. And we, I fear, in broadcasting ourselves to the world and opening ourselves up to public scrutiny, are muddying the waters on the future of our individual privacy. We're muddying it legally, and we're muddying it in our own minds. We're muddying it in our culture, in what our expectations are for privacy. And I think our kids are paying a really severe price for that, for having a panopticon looking at them. And just as President Trump didn't know in 2002 that he would someday be president and have his second administration embroiled in a controversy over what seemed like private choices at the time, I think all of us face the exact same problem, and our kids face this problem quite acutely. They will make stupid decisions. They'll say stupid stuff like Trump did in this 2002 article and live to regret the permanence of the internet. And that's as personal as I can make this story because I don't know where else to take it. The thing that's so painful about both of these stories is how disempowering they are. They leave all of us to feel like we have no control over what's going on and that we are all pawns in inter-elite warfare and power games. And there's this speech from President Kennedy, JFK, that touches on this against the backdrop of the Cold War that I think is really profound and important and also kind of cryptic. And I want to leave you with it because it's prescient in ways that feel very of the moment, even as they were in a completely different context in the early 1960s.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control.
And all I'll say is, as I get older, I find myself appreciating JFK more and more. But let me know what you think. Was this helpful? Was it useful? Is it driving you crazy like it's driving me crazy? Let me know in the comments. And of course, head over to dadssavesamerica.com where we'll put a list of all the links and articles, including the great work by Matt Taibbi and others who are exploring these stories with a lot of depth and helping all of us navigate them as best we can. And of course, have a great weekend.